Top 9 most severe cases of radiation poisoning in history.
The 11th of November 2004, the late President Pallet, a well-known statesman who had traveled to Vietnam, experienced diarrhea, vomiting, high levels of alkalinity, leukopenia, crimson streaks on his cheeks, and fast balance. Even after 9 years, a team of Swiss scientists was unable to definitively determine if Mr. Earhart was beheaded, despite confirming that radioactive polonium-210 was present in Mr. Earhart's body at levels up to 20 times greater than usual. It is known that only 1/1,000,000th of a gram of this material is lethal, but only nations with advanced nuclear technology are able to make it, and even then, the cost per millionth of a gram might reach up to $1 million. Among these nations, only Israel ranks first. Even now, humanity does not. However, the 9 cases of poisoning radiation listed below are unquestionably the worst in history. On December 30, 1958, at a facility in Los Angeles, California, chemical operator Harold Kelly was working with a large mixing tank. The tank normally contained only 0 to 0.1 grams of plutonium per liter, but on this day, the concentration was 200 times higher due to a mistake. Kelly was unaware of the high concentration of plutonium and proceeded to work with the tank as usual. However, the plutonium in the tank reached its critical point and released a large burst of neutrons and gamma radiation. Kelly was exposed to a massive dose of radiation and suffered severe burns. Kelly was rushed to the hospital, but he died 35 hours later from complications of radiation poisoning. His death was a tragic reminder of the dangers of working with radioactive materials. Harry Daghlian was a physicist who worked on the Manhattan Project, the project that developed the first atomic bomb. On August 21, 1945, he was conducting an experiment to build a neutron reflector for use in the atomic bomb. He was using the method of stacking blocks of tungsten carbide around a plutonium core by hand. When he reached the final block, the radiation meter warned that the plutonium core could reach supercriticality, meaning it could spontaneously explode. Harry Daghlian hurriedly withdrew his hand, but accidentally dropped the tungsten carbide block, causing the plutonium core to go supercritical and release a large burst of neutron radiation. Harry Daghlian was exposed to a massive dose of neutron radiation and died 25 days later from radiation poisoning. Harry Daghlian was a physicist who worked on the Manhattan Project, the project that developed the first atomic bomb. On August 21, 1945, he was conducting an experiment to build a neutron reflector for use in the atomic bomb. He was using the method of stacking blocks of tungsten carbide around a plutonium core by hand. When he reached the final block, the radiation meter warned that the plutonium core could reach supercriticality, meaning it could spontaneously explode. Harry Daghlian hurriedly withdrew his hand, but accidentally dropped the tungsten carbide block, causing the plutonium core to go supercritical and release a large burst of neutron radiation. Harry Daghlian was exposed to a massive dose of neutron radiation and died 25 days later from radiation poisoning.
A wealthy man injured himself in a train fall in 1927. His doctor prescribed a radium-laced tonic called Radithor. Unaware of the dangers, he consumed an excessive amount, nearly 1,400 bottles in 3 years. By 1930, radiation poisoning from Radithor caused him to lose most of his jaw, develop a brain abscess, and suffer skull damage. Tragically, he died in 1932, his body so radioactive it required a lead-lined coffin. Hisashi Uchi, a worker at a Tokaimura nuclear facility in Japan, became a tragic victim of a radiation accident in 1999. In an attempt to speed up production, Hisashi and 2 colleagues bypassed safety protocols, manually pouring a massive 16 kilograms of uranium into a tank instead of the usual safe amount. This triggered an explosion, exposing them all to radiation. Hisashi, who stood closest to the tank, suffered the most severe radiation sickness. He experienced excruciating pain, vomiting, and lost consciousness. Doctors desperately tried various treatments, including stem cell transplants and blood transfusions, but the immense radiation dose had destroyed his body's ability to heal. Hisashi's condition deteriorated rapidly. Despite his pleas to leave the hospital, his family and doctors held on to hope. However, after 83 days of agonizing treatment, Hisashi succumbed to the radiation poisoning, becoming the person with the highest recorded radiation exposure in history. While Hisashi Uchi's case is undeniably tragic, another scientist, Marie Curie, suffered chronic radiation exposure throughout her career. A renowned chemist and physicist, Curie is revered in Vietnam with a school named after her. Her research focused on radioactive elements like uranium, radium, and polonium, often alongside her husband Pierre. For years, the Curies remained unaware of the detrimental effects of radiation. Sadly, Pierre died in a carriage accident in 1906, while Marie continued her research for another 28 years. Throughout her career, Marie carried radioactive materials like radium in her lab coat pocket, even admiring their eerie glow in the dark. This prolonged exposure ultimately took its toll. Marie passed away in 1934, suffering from cataracts, anemia, and ultimately death due to radiation-induced aplastic anemia, a condition where the body stops producing enough blood cells. The severity of radiation damage was so profound that even Curie's research materials from the 1890s onward are considered hazardous. Remarkably, even her cookbooks, presumably contaminated with radioactive particles, are considered banned substances and require protective clothing to handle. The K-19 submarine, a Soviet vessel patrolling the Atlantic Ocean during the tense Cold War of 1961, became the scene of a near catastrophe. On the morning of July 4th, a malfunction caused the K-19's reactor to overheat. This posed a grave threat, as the onboard nuclear missiles could potentially devastate entire cities in the event of an explosion. Additionally, a nuclear disaster near any coastline could have escalated tensions and triggered a Third World War. Coincidentally, this incident unfolded as the United States celebrated Independence Day. A team of courageous engineers ventured into the scorching reactor compartment, bypassing a faulty valve and connecting it directly to a water supply in a desperate attempt to cool the reactor. Despite their efforts, radiation had already spread throughout the vessel. Nevertheless, the K-19 limped south in search of a Soviet support ship. Fortunately, their distress call was answered by a Soviet destroyer, leading to a rescue mission. Tragically, the heroic actions of the K-19 crew came at a cost. 8 sailors succumbed to radiation exposure, exceeding even the levels experienced in the Chernobyl disaster. Their bravery remained unrecognized for decades. The Chernobyl disaster unfolded on April 26, 1986, when a Soviet-Ukrainian nuclear plant exploded. The blast released a massive radioactive plume, contaminating vast areas across Europe and beyond. Long-term effects remain unclear, with estimates of hundreds of thousands to millions potentially dying from radiation exposure. Chernobyl stands today as a stark reminder of the tragedy. The atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 unleashed a horrific catastrophe. Scientists estimate that within a 2-kilometer radius of the explosions, nearly half the population died instantly. Countless others suffered from acute radiation sickness, experiencing agonizing symptoms like fever, vomiting blood, and hair loss. The survivors faced a long and painful battle. Many succumbed to cancers like leukemia in the years following, a grim consequence of radiation exposure. Tragically, even unborn children were affected, with some exhibiting severe deformities at birth. While the planned attack on Tokyo with a more powerful bomb thankfully never occurred, the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki demonstrated the devastating power of atomic weapons and ultimately led to Japan's surrender, marking a turning point in World War II. While radiation exists naturally in our environment, including foods like bananas, it can be harmful in high doses. Incidents like the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki demonstrate the devastating consequences of uncontrolled radiation. Therefore, it's crucial to use radiation for beneficial purposes, like medical treatments, with strict safety protocols in place. As for mushroom growing, that's no joke.